The Nebraska Cornhuskers, fresh off a win over the Michigan State Spartans, take on the Maryland Terrapins, who are coming off a home loss and a really ugly choke job loss to the Washington Huskies. They led Washington 20-3 for the majority of the game. Actually, or led them for the majority of the game. At one point, it was 20-0 in the third quarter. They lost 24-20. Maryland is at home, thankfully. Before I continue, liking the video, watching the video all the way through, and commenting your thoughts down below are the best ways to support the channel, as they help push me into the algorithm, help me to receive a larger paycheck that I can use to reinvest in producing elite analysis for you all. Subscribing to the channel, hitting the notification bell, sharing the video around, and supporting us in other ways that you can find out via the description are other awesome ways to support our operation at College Football with Sam. We are becoming the best. We want to be the best. Thank you all for making that possible. With a chance to redeem themselves after that loss, Nebraska will be traveling on the road, and the Cornhuskers are a 6.5, you heard that right, 6.5 point favorite. This will be a 3:30 p.m. Eastern time game this Saturday on the Big Ten Network. Hopefully Jake Butt's calling it, but I don't know if Jake Butt is calling it. What I'm curious to see between these two teams is how real are their defenses. I think Nebraska answered the bell, and we'll talk about them first here. I think they answered the bell quite well, if I do say so myself, against the Michigan State Spartans. Now, Michigan State put points on the board. They scored 27. They at one point led 21-14 and looked honestly like the better team for probably half the game. But Nebraska being at home, Nebraska getting the blocked punt early, gave them enough wiggle room to establish themselves as the better team at the end. And a big part of the reason why they did was their defense. Their defense impressed me in that game. Again, I know 27 points, but Aiden Childs is a great QB. Smith and Lindgren are great offensive minds. They had to be 4 of 5 on fourth down to even get to 27 points. And Michigan State, I thought they would run the ball pretty well. They didn't. Nebraska did an admirable job slowing down their rushing attack in that game. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but Childs was their rushing offense. I mean, they held Michigan State to 2.3 yards per carry. Mekhi Frazier, Michigan State's best back, only averaged 3.6. Nebraska, despite taking more sacks, averaged more yards per carry. They had 3.3 yards per carry. Emmett Johnson had 6.4 for 3 touchdowns. That was impressive to me. I mistakenly picked Michigan State to win that game, thinking they would win the rushing battle. They competed in the trenches in a much more impressive way than I think most college football analysts or Nebraska people thought, but I was too far in the other direction. And at the end of the day, Nebraska established themselves as the more Big Ten-like team. It was a really underrated win because you're coming off a bye. Rhule historically is not perfect off the bye. Smith is historically better than him off the bye. And Michigan State had some advantages to exploit, and they didn't. And other times they did, but Nebraska was just able to respond like that and take advantage of Michigan State's errors. It's a really impressive performance overall. I view that as a big win for Matt Rhule in Nebraska. Honestly, I kind of view it as a program-changing win. I know it's against a Michigan State team who may or may not go bowling at this point and who will struggle to get there, but Nebraska usually loses those games. Last year's team loses that game. Every Nebraska team since 2016 at least, if not since the final Bo Pelini team in 2014, loses that game. And Nebraska came out on top. That was really impressive. For the Cornhuskers, what you want to do here is you want to see if your defense with a light box can stop this Maryland rushing attack. If you do, you could win by 30. Maryland can't run the ball to save their life. You have been bad at run defense, but this is something that I thought of today for Nebraska. Hear me out. Michigan's third in America in yards per carry. And a lot of those yards against Nebraska came off of well-blocked, explosive plays where Michigan often played off Bryce Underwood's mobility. They had some success with power rushing, some, but if you look and watch that game, they didn't have a ton of success. with running up the middle and establishing themselves in power rushing. They had some, but it wasn't like every time they ran the ball, they got at least 5 or 4 or 6 yards per carry. Sometimes Nebraska stuffed them at the lines of scrimmage, sometimes. But Michigan was able to get those big home-hitting runs because their receivers blocked downfield and were more physical than Nebraska's DBs in that regard. Nebraska was out of position at times. And Michigan, because they're bigger and more athletic, when they pull block, and that gives their offensive linemen some momentum to, push the defensive linemen and linebackers around, well, they can just shove them down or put them in their place because they're bigger, more athletic. If you're in Nebraska and you're playing a rushing offense like Michigan, the last thing you want is for Michigan to be able to develop and be patient on the ground and let the blocks develop, because size for size, athlete for athlete, you're never going to beat them. You want to snuff that out really quickly. And when Nebraska couldn't, it ended in disaster. Not exactly the same with Cincinnati, but kind of similar. Michigan being a better version of the Cincinnati team that Nebraska played. But look at Cincinnati this year. Cincinnati is 9th in yards per carry. They average 6.7. So what if Nebraska just played 2 top 10 rushing offenses, and while their rushing defense is certainly not top 10, it's probably top 50, top 40, could even be top 30, top 25, because let's be real here. Top 10, the 10th best team is typically much, much better than the 25th best team. There's typically, a drop-off historically from, the 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 zone, and then, 4 to 10, and then, 10 or maybe 11 or 12 to 25. That's the tier 3. Tier 1 and tier 2 are beginning to merge, but your 12th to 25th best team is still significantly worse typically than your teams in the top 10. So what if Nebraska's defense ain't bad, but they've just faced some pretty poor matchups in terms of size and in terms of what Cincinnati and Michigan want to do? Maryland, we'll talk about it in a bit here. They're outside the top 120 in a variety of rushing categories. They do not have a good offensive line. Their running back room is not inspiring. They lost their best back, Roman Hemby, to Indiana, and he's looked stellar there. Nebraska, I wouldn't say they're strong up front defensively, but are they weak there? After that Michigan State game, I don't think so. I don't. I mean, Deshaun Singleton at safety played extremely well in that game. I think that for Nebraska, Riley Van Poppel, Cam Lenhart, Keanu Davis, Javin Wright, Dasan McCullum, Marquise Watson-Trent, they impressed. Holding Michigan State when, even adjusting for sacks under 4 yards per carry is impressive because they've been good at run blocking. That was a good showing. It was a good effort by Nebraska and that defense. They're 11th, too, in passing success rate. This is offensively, thanks to Dylan Raiola at quarterback, Ja'Cory Barney Jr. at wide receiver. They have a 52.3% passing success rate, and they only allow 3.39 yards per drop back, which is first. You can thank Deshaun Singleton, Andrew Marshall, Sear Wright. You can thank Marquise Buford Jr. You can thank Malcolm Hartzog. It's a group that is entirely made up of seniors, except for Andrew Marshall, and Wright is a day 2 NFL draft pick. After that Michigan State game, and with how Cincinnati was able to bully Iowa State in the trenches, and Iowa State with Dominique Orange and Caleb Bacon, they are not soft. You saw what they did to Iowa's rushing offense. Iowa was able to run on them successfully for 3 quarters, but not the way Cincinnati did. And we've seen Michigan. Wisconsin's defensive front, I've said this since week 1, is very impressive. Michigan was able to create a big run and at the end of the day have some power rushing success on the ground against them. That's admirable. Nebraska's played, no shame, they can't control their schedule. They've played awesome rushing attacks, and they just didn't have the size, physicality, or athleticism yet, and maybe even some of its scheme, maybe they had some schematic errors there to deal with it. But for everyone else, I think they're going to do somewhat of an admirable job on the ground. My issue with Nebraska, my only issue with them, honestly, after the MSU game, I don't even think their D-line is their biggest weakness. It's their pass blocking. They really struggle protecting the quarterback, whether it's Elijah Pritchett, whether it's Gunnar Katula, Teddy Prohaska. Their tackle situation is rough. And Dylan Raiola does have a tendency to hold on to the football longer than he should. So that's a bad combination. On top of Raiola being mobile enough to, make awesome plays in the pocket, but not mobile enough to be extreme rushing threat. And then Nebraska's offensive line is not great at run blocking either. So that allows pass rushers to tee off and not have to think about stopping the run. They can pursue right out of the gate instead of having to figure out whether pursuing would be a mistake, because then they're allowing a wide open lane up the middle, or sideline to sideline, whatever. Nebraska's offensive line is the thing that's holding it back. I honestly think after watching this team play, the defense is probably a bit underrated. The offense, I wouldn't say it's overrated, but it definitely has some weaknesses that I didn't think it would preseason, and weaknesses that could cripple it even against pretty mediocre teams. So Maryland, for example, and this is where we'll move on to the Terps here. Maryland is not a phenomenal team by any stretch of the imagination, but they're strong on defense, and they're playing host, and they're good enough offensively to make it a game for Nebraska. That's why Nebraska's only favored by 6.5 points here. Maryland's viewed about as close to Michigan State as you could possibly view them. I mean, think about it. You have a 6-point swing from hosting your opponent to playing them on the road. You do, because home field's 3 points. So Nebraska, in theory, would be favored by 12.5, 11.5 points here. Exactly what they were favored over Michigan State by. And the difference between Maryland and Michigan State is Michigan State's wonderful on offense, but disastrous on defense. Maryland's the opposite, at least analytically. Michigan State, in actuality, is just good offensively. Same with Maryland on defense. They're just good, above average. I think Michigan State, personally, is a better team than Maryland. But this game's being played in Maryland's turf. There is a little bit of travel here with Nebraska, and I think Maryland can match up well in some regards with the Cornhuskers. That being their run defense. I mean, it's hard to run on Maryland. I mean, Maryland's defensive front against Wisconsin sort of looked like Michigan's when you factor in the overall game. They had some issues against Northern Illinois, and look, I think Michigan is a better defensive front than Maryland. That's not what I was saying. What I'm saying is the fact they were able to, at times, look like a Michigan caliber front. And analytically, they've at times been perceived as an Ohio State level front. Again, not saying that, just saying analytically, sometimes those things can lie, means there is some substance to that unit. This being a 3:30 game, I don't know if Maryland Stadium is going to be full. I know it was against Washington. Don't know if it will be for this game. I do know that with what Maryland has been able to do defensively, they will have some opportunities to take advantage of the Cornhusker offensive line. I think they could, in theory, make Nebraska one-dimensional offensively, make Raiola have to carry the team, and he can, but you'd rather have to make him carry the team than allow a balanced attack that can march up and down the field all over you. And then offensively, that's where the matchup really begins to take issue. Really. I mean, Maryland is 19 sacks through 5 games. They're averaging almost 4 sacks per game. That's pretty good. But you have to score points if you want to win. And Maryland is 132nd in rushing yards per carry, averaging 3.52. They're probably not going to run on Nebraska's defense. And we've already discussed Nebraska's first nationally in yards allowed per pass attempt, and I think they're second or maybe third in expected points added allowed per pass attempt. Maryland is the best in terms of defense and making sure that you don't get big plays on them, and they force a lot of punts. They get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Their strength, ironically, historically under Loxley, their defense has been strong in the secondary. They have Jalen Husky, who's really impressive. Kevin Humes is impressive. But I think more importantly is that defensive tackle and defensive end group. So Zahir Mathis and Sidney Stewart, who are phenomenal freshmen, Nasir Taylor, they've hit on a lot of their freshman defensive ends, which is pretty incredible. And then Cam Rice, Dylan Fontes, Daniel Owens, Ian Thomas on that defensive tackle group. And then you got Daniel Wingate, Trey Reddick, Keyshawn Flowers at the linebacker spot. That's their area of strength defensively. And then you have, again, Jalen Husky and some of those DBs who are still strong, but it's so interesting. Maryland lost, LaVon Johnson to Texas, Kellen Wyatt to Indiana, and Wyatt's had some success in Indiana. Johnson hasn't cracked the rotation much, and it feels like Maryland upgraded there despite losing a lot. It's kind of cool to witness. Maryland's offensive line, it's probably better than Nebraska's at pass protection, but gosh, that run blocking is something that I cannot ignore. That is so bad. So unbelievably bad. To be outside the top 130 in yards allowed per carry is just, it's an atrocity. And I honestly think Nebraska, on top of having the better overall team, is better coached. I think that their defense will lock down Maryland's offense overall. The only thing I question is Maryland this year has been good at defense overall, especially run defense. Nebraska's not been all that great at running the football. And Maryland has 9 interceptions and a forced fumble, and they're averaging almost 4 sacks per game. So they could get some turnovers off Raiola and eventually maybe open that defense up like a can opener. Maryland could play the can opener game. You sit back, you wait for the cans to roll your way. The turnover, the can, in this analogy is the defense, it rolls your way because, well, the offense just made the defense get on the field by giving it to your defense. And your offense can function as that can opener, being very patient and maybe cracking that Nebraska defense. But that's going to take a lot. And Nebraska's favored by 6.5 points, despite it being on the road, for a reason. So give me Nebraska to win and give me them to cover. I think that Minnesota is going to be a tougher test. Offensively, because they can run the ball better. And I think there's a world where they could even pass the football better. Also, it's a Friday night game. It's going to be Nebraska's second road test. I actually don't think Minnesota's even that much better than Maryland. I think there's actually a good chance Maryland's better than Minnesota. Minnesota's an awful football team, but Fleck's a better coach than Loxley, in my opinion, although I think Loxley up until last weekend did a really good coaching job. He's sent in a lot of his freshman recruits. That guy knows how to recruit. He knows how to, I think, build sustainable success. Maryland's just a hard job, and last year they had some issues. Still do this year. But again, they're Maryland. I think Nebraska is in year 3 of Matt Rhule. I picked him to go 10-2 preseason, and I kind of went away from that, picking Michigan State to beat him, just because I didn't like what I saw. But I still thought they would win, 8 games, maybe a dip down to 7, but I was kind of thinking 8, or maybe with how Penn State was performing, 9, and you just lose 2 early games and then mostly win out. The Michigan performance is aging better. The Cincinnati performance is aging incredibly well. I think the Michigan State performance will age well, too. And Maryland, look, they're not coached to the same degree Nebraska is. They don't have the same talent. Nebraska has the better QB, running back. They're weak on the O-line. They're much stronger there than Maryland is. They're better at receiver. They're better at tight end. They're better at DB. Linebacker's probably a push. Maryland's probably much better on the D-line. And then special teams is easily Nebraska. And Maryland doesn't have the matchup with their offense to properly utilize their D-line versus Nebraska's O-line. Maryland's D-line in this game, I would not be shocked if they were almost incapable outside of a few plays of exploiting their D-line versus Nebraska's O-line advantage. Because Nebraska defensively should be able to entirely lock down this Maryland offense. So give me the Cornhuskers to win. Give me them to cover. And I think that they will move on to 5-1, and that Minnesota game is going to be a very exciting game that I'll also be previewing here on College Football with Sam. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, comment your analysis and thoughts down below so I can reciprocate my thoughts with you in the comment section, and check out anything on these end screens that are up here. Whether it's a recommended video or playlists for teams that I'm talking about in a preview, prediction, or a reaction, make sure to hit the notification bell on those, scroll through them, and watch any suggested videos if you are interested. Thank you for helping College Football with Sam become the best and the biggest college football brand and channel on YouTube and other social media platforms. We will reach that one day because of your support.